They locked it away. The effects didn't stop. In 1974, a museum registrar filed an internal report after 3 staff members were hospitalized within 7 months. All 3 had handled the same object. No radiation, no toxins, no mechanical fault. The report was sealed. Across continents, similar files exist. Different languages. Same conclusion. Certain artifacts don't just sit in display cases. They interfere. Deaths cluster. Illness repeats. Accidents follow proximity, not exposure time. Then the pattern escalates. Exhibits are quietly removed. Curators stop giving interviews. Access protocols change without explanation. Officially, nothing is wrong. Unofficially, entire wings are rerouted. Science has tested these objects for contamination, chemical residue, environmental hazards. The results come back clean, and yet the incidents continue. If these artifacts are only superstition, the data shouldn't line up. But it does, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. This is not folklore. It's a containment problem. Before the word curse is used, institutions use a different language. They call it incident clustering. They call it handling anomalies. They call it coincidence, until the numbers refuse to behave. Over the last 2 centuries, museums, universities, and private collectors have documented a recurring problem. Certain objects produce harm that cannot be traced to chemistry, mechanics, radiation, or environment. The damage follows the artifact itself, not the room, not the method, not the handler's background. Move the object, and the incidents move with it. This is where the public narrative usually stops. Folklore, superstition, psychological suggestion. But internal records tell a different story. When archivists began comparing cases across institutions, a pattern emerged that was never meant to be public. Discovery is followed by documentation. Documentation is followed by injury, death, or collapse. Then comes silence. The response is almost always the same. Exhibits are reclassified. Access is restricted. Handling protocols appear without explanation. Researchers are reassigned. In some cases, the artifact disappears entirely. Not stolen, not lost, but formally withdrawn. What unites these objects is not culture, Iceman, or material. Some are gemstones, others are tools, paintings, relics, or ceremonial items. They come from different civilizations and different centuries, but they trigger the same administrative behavior and the same quiet fear. Science has attempted to explain this: statistical coincidence, confirmation bias, environmental contamination. In one case, mold spores were blamed. In another, stress-related illness. Each explanation works once. None of them work 10 times in a row. And this is where the question becomes dangerous. If matter is passive, these events should not repeat with this precision. If objects are inert, proximity should not matter. Yet it does. What follows are 10 artifacts with documented histories of harm, objects that left measurable consequences and forced institutions to act without ever admitting why. Some are famous, others were never meant to be seen, and the first story was already classified. In September 2001, an antique wine cabinet surfaced at a small estate sale in Portland, Oregon. It looked ordinary: dark wood, brass hinges, Hebrew inscriptions carved inside the frame. The seller said it had belonged to a Holocaust survivor and was never meant to be opened. The buyer dismissed that warning. He listed it online weeks later under a new name, the Dybbuk Box. That label would follow it. So would the damage. Then the symptoms began. The first owner reported persistent nightmares within days of bringing the box home. Not anxiety, not stress, the same dream every night. An old woman, a smell of smoke. After selling the cabinet, the dreams stopped immediately. The next owner developed sudden hair loss, skin lesions, and coughing fits with no medical cause. Hospital tests returned normal. He sold the box. The symptoms transferred. The pattern didn't pause. It migrated. Documentation followed the object. Each owner independently recorded disturbances: electrical failures, shadow figures, sleep paralysis. One man suffered a stroke at 49 after placing the box in his bedroom. Another reported hearing whispers in a language he did not understand. The accounts were separated by geography, age, and belief. The only constant was the cabinet. The scans showed nothing. The logs disagreed. As attention grew, so did institutional interest. A university-affiliated research team requested temporary access. The request was approved. Within weeks, access was revoked without explanation. Emails went unanswered. The artifact was returned early, sealed in protective wrapping not listed in any handling protocol. A private collector later acquired it and immediately signed a non-disclosure agreement. No press release followed. No explanation was offered. The consequences were not abstract. One owner's mother developed rapid-onset dementia after the box was stored in her home. She forgot her son's name within 3 months. Another handler reported losing his sense of smell permanently. These were not rumors. They were recorded, time-stamped, and then quietly ignored. He missed his daughter's graduation. In 2011, the Dybbuk Box was placed into long-term storage. Its location was not disclosed. The listing that once documented its chain of custody was altered, then removed. Public references shifted tone. What had been treated as a curiosity was reframed as a hoax. The earlier medical records were never retracted. They were simply not discussed. The object was not destroyed. It was contained. By 2011, 7 handlers were documented. All incidents followed the box. The stone entered European records in 1668, extracted from the Koh-i-Noor mine in India. A deep blue diamond, 45 carats, cut with impossible symmetry for its time. Jean-Baptiste Tavernier sold it to the French crown. Within a generation, the royal line that owned it was gone, executed, exiled, erased. The diamond survived. At first, historians treated the deaths as political coincidence. Revolutions are violent, empires fall. But as the stone changed hands, the pattern detached from history and followed the object itself. Owners lost fortunes without explanation. Heirs died suddenly. Families collapsed within years of acquisition. Insurance records began to show something unusual. Claims filed within predictable windows after transfer. The timing was consistent. The causes were not. By the early 20th century, the diamond was no longer a private heirloom. It moved through banks, collectors, and eventually into public display. That's when the documentation became formal. Museum registrars tracked handler exposure. Conservators logged proximity times. After one routine rotation, a staff member collapsed during transport. Medical exams found nothing conclusive. The report was filed under non-attributable incident. Then it happened again and again. Internal Smithsonian memos from the 1960s reference a handling protocol never made public. The diamond was no longer to be worn. No direct skin contact. Limited exposure windows. Rotations performed by senior staff only. The language avoided superstition entirely. It focused on risk mitigation. Vault Rotation Protocol 11B was introduced. No explanation attached. The human cost remained real. One private owner lost his entire estate within 3 years of purchase through accidents, lawsuits, and sudden illness. His son died before inheritance proceedings concluded. Another caretaker reported progressive neurological symptoms after repeated exposure. The condition stabilized only after reassignment. He never returned to the exhibit floor. Publicly, the Hope Diamond is framed as history, a marvel, a symbol. Privately, it is treated as a liability, not dangerous enough to destroy, not inert enough to ignore. It remains on display, but under rules that apply to no other gemstone in the building. The curse is denied. The protocols remain. Protocol 11B was activated again in 1965 without public incident disclosure. In September 1991, a German hiking couple discovered a human body emerging from melting ice in the Ötztal Alps. At first, authorities assumed it was a recent climbing accident. That assessment lasted less than 48 hours. Radiocarbon testing placed the body at over 5,300 years old. A man from the Copper Age, perfectly preserved. He was named Ötzi. Among the items recovered was a small copper-bladed dagger, still sharp, still intact. Metallurgists were immediately interested. The purity of the copper exceeded expectations for the period. The blade showed advanced casting techniques not supposed to exist at the time. The dagger was logged, catalogued, and transported with the body to Innsbruck for study. That's when the deaths began. The first was the forensic pathologist who led the initial examination. He died in a car accident less than a year after publishing his findings. The mountain guide who helped recover the body was killed in an avalanche shortly afterward, despite decades of experience on that terrain. A journalist who filmed the recovery died of a sudden brain tumor. Then another, then another. By the 5th death, the pattern could no longer be dismissed quietly. All victims had direct contact with Ötzi or his artifacts. All were healthy prior to involvement. Causes varied. accidents, illness, environmental exposure, but the statistical clustering raised internal concern. A confidential review was initiated by Austrian authorities. The public was told nothing. The dagger remained under analysis. The files did not circulate. Researchers documented something else. Personnel who handled the dagger for extended periods reported migraines, disorientation, and recurring dreams involving snow and pursuit. These reports were informal, buried in medical leave requests and reassignment forms. No toxic agents were detected, no contamination. The blade itself tested inert. The instruments showed nothing. The symptoms persisted. One member of the recovery team lost his closest colleague within months. Another died before his final paper was published. Families noticed the pattern before institutions acknowledged it. Spouses asked for transfers. Assistants refused further contact. The dagger was eventually removed from routine handling and placed under restricted access. The justification cited preservation concerns. No risk assessment was released. No apology was issued. The humane cost was understated in official summaries. One of the guides left behind 2 young children. A researcher's widow described how her husband became withdrawn in the weeks after his last examination session, complaining of a pressure he couldn't explain. He never finished his work. Today, Ötzi's body is displayed behind controlled glass. The dagger is shown sparingly, under conditions that mirror those used for hazardous materials. The term curse is publicly rejected. Privately, access is logged with unusual precision. The object is treated as unstable. The language says otherwise. By 2004, 5 associated deaths were formally acknowledged. No common cause identified. The vase was crafted in southern Italy in the 15th century. Silver, hand-etched. Commissioned as a wedding gift for a young bride in the town of Bassano del Grappa. According to parish records, she died the night she received it. No illness. No violence. She was found lifeless beside the object before dawn. The vase was buried with her. It didn't stay buried. Decades later, grave robbers unearthed the tomb and removed the vase. Within months, each man involved was dead. One from a sudden fall, another from an unexplained fever. The third disappeared entirely. By the 19th century, the object had developed a reputation that followed it wherever it went. Owners didn't display it. They stored it, locked away, wrapped. The deaths continued anyway. Distance didn't help. Ownership was enough. In 1988, the vase resurfaced publicly after being inherited by a family unaware of its history. Within 3 months, the patriarch died in a traffic accident. His son inherited the vase and suffered liver failure shortly afterward, despite no prior diagnosis. A third relative sold the object, attempting to end the chain. The buyer died before payment cleared. The transfer didn't break it. It extended it. Italian authorities intervened quietly. No press conference. No cultural advisory. Police confiscated the vase under the justification of heritage protection. An internal memorandum described it as a recurring fatality-linked artifact. That language never appeared in public records. The vase was buried in a lead-lined container in an undisclosed location. Lime was poured over the site to prevent recovery. No museum claimed it. No archive cataloged it. The human cost was spread across generations. Families fractured. Estates dissolved. One woman lost her husband and brother within a single year after the vase entered her home. She later testified that officials advised her never to speak about it again. She complied. She never remarried. Today, the Bassano vase is officially listed as lost. No photographs are publicly accessible. No provenance records remain intact. Yet burial records confirm a site that is never excavated and never discussed. The object was not destroyed. It was removed from circulation. After 1988, the site was permanently sealed under state authority. In November 1922, Howard Carter breached the sealed tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The discovery was historic. An intact royal burial chamber, untouched for over 3,000 years. Gold, statues, jewelry, ritual objects positioned with mathematical precision. Within weeks, newspapers began using a word archaeologists avoided: curse. Then people started dying. Lord Carnarvon, Carter's financial backer, was the first. He died months after the tomb was opened from a mosquito bite that became fatally infected. The timing unsettled even skeptics. Over the next decade, more followed. A radiologist who examined the mummy died suddenly. A member of the excavation team collapsed without warning. By 1935, At least 8 people directly connected to the opening were dead. Different causes, same proximity. Egyptian authorities and British institutions moved quickly to control the narrative. Deaths were attributed to coincidence, infection, and poor medical standards of the era. The tomb, they argued, had been sealed for centuries. Exposure to ancient bacteria or mold spores was a plausible explanation. It was a clean argument, and for a moment it worked. But internal correspondence complicated the picture. Staff who handled specific burial objects, particularly ritual figurines and amulets, reported symptoms not consistent with infection. Insomnia, sudden anxiety, neurological complaints. These reports never reached the press. They were recorded in medical leave files and private letters. The objects were quietly removed from routine study and redistributed among collections. No public explanation followed. No recall was issued. Here, skeptics raise their strongest case. Ancient tombs can contain toxic molds. Confined spaces can harbor deadly pathogens. Stress and expectation can amplify fear. Any one of these could explain isolated deaths. This explanation appears in official summaries and museum placards. It is reasonable. It is incomplete. The pattern did not end with the excavation. Decades later, museum conservators reported similar disturbances after prolonged exposure to certain items from the tomb. One technician suffered sudden respiratory failure after cataloging a set of funerary objects. Another experienced rapid cognitive decline. No causal link was established. The incidents were logged and closed. The objects stayed. The handlers changed. The human loss was real, even when explanations were softened. One excavator's family received no acknowledgement beyond a formal letter. Another died before publishing his research, his notes absorbed into institutional archives without attribution. His name faded. The artifacts remained. Today, Tutankhamun's treasures are displayed behind glass, celebrated as symbols of ancient splendor. But access to certain items is restricted beyond standard conservation practice. Handling protocols are unusually strict. Exposure time are limited. The language avoids superstition entirely. No one says curse. The procedures say something else. By 1939, multiple burial objects were restricted under British museum access controls. The diamond entered recorded history in the 14th century, already infamous. Weighing over 100 carats before recutting, the Koh-i-Noor passed through empires by force, not inheritance. Every ruler who possessed it lost power within a single generation. Overthrown, blinded, murdered, the stone endured. Persian chronicles noted the pattern first. Mughal records confirmed it later. Male rulers who wore the diamond suffered violent ends, while queens who possessed it lived but watched their dynasties collapse. By the time the British East India Company seized the stone in 1849, the pattern was no longer anecdotal. It was documented history. The object did not bring conquest. It followed it. When the diamond reached Britain, something changed. The violence stopped, but the precautions began. Internal correspondence from the Crown Jewels Archive notes an unusual directive. The Koh-i-Noor was never to be worn by a reigning king. Only queens or consorts were permitted contact. No scientific justification was offered. The policy was framed as tradition. The origin was not discussed. The rule was absolute. Handlers reported anomalies during transport and recutting. One lapidary suffered a sudden mental breakdown weeks after working on the stone. Another abandoned the trade entirely. These incidents were quietly removed from official timelines. Publicly, the diamond was reframed as symbolic. Privately, it was isolated. Direct handling was minimized. Exposure became ceremonial. The human cost was less immediate than in earlier centuries, but it was still present. A security officer assigned to repeated rotations developed chronic insomnia and cardiovascular issues. He was reassigned without explanation. Another staff member lost his spouse within months of a major relocation involving the jewel. No causal link was acknowledged. The incidents were logged. The pattern remained. By the early 20th century, the British Crown amended internal handling law. The Koh-i-Noor would never again leave controlled custody. Requests for repatriation were denied on security grounds. The language emphasized preservation, but the procedures mirrored those used for high-risk materials. The diamond was displayed. It was never free. Today, the Koh-i-Noor rests behind reinforced glass, unmoving, untouched. No king has worn it since its arrival in Britain. The explanation given is ceremonial convention. The record shows something else. Empires learned. The object taught them. In 1852, crown handling rules were permanently amended. No male monarch permitted contact. The diamond surfaced publicly in the early 20th century under a different name. The Eye of Brahma. According to its provenance, it had once been set into a sacred statue in India and later removed. After that point, the deaths began to align with ownership, not geography. 3 women, 3 jumps. The first was a Russian princess in 1910. Shortly after acquiring the diamond, she leapt from a high window in Moscow. Newspapers cited despair. No note was found. The diamond vanished into private circulation. Years later, it resurfaced with a New York heiress. She jumped from a skyscraper less than a year after taking possession. A third owner, also female, died. Same way, different lives, identical ends. By the time insurers noticed the pattern, the stone had earned its modern name, the Black Orlov. Actuarial records flagged it as a repeat loss object. Policies were rewritten. Coverage windows shortened. The diamond was not banned, but it became undesirable. Dealers began refusing to handle it. The market reacted first. Institutions followed. In the 1940s, the stone was recut, reducing its size in an attempt to break the curse. The language used publicly was symbolic. Privately, the recut was treated as a containment attempt. Afterward, the fatalities stopped, but the restrictions did not lift. The diamond was never again worn casually. Handling logs show unusually short exposure times and mandatory secondary witnesses during transport. No one worked alone. No one lingered. The human toll extended beyond the owners. One gem appraiser involved in pre-recut evaluations suffered a psychological collapse and withdrew from the profession entirely. Another reported recurring vertigo and panic episodes after repeated examinations. These reports were filed as stress-related and closed. No investigation followed. No pattern acknowledged. Today, the Black Orlov still exists, but it is rarely displayed. When it is, it appears under heavy security and minimal lighting. Its past is summarized politely. 3 suicides. An unfortunate coincidence. The documentation says otherwise. The deaths stopped. The fear didn't. After the 1947 recut, direct handling was permanently limited to supervised intervals only. In the early 1980s, fire departments across northern England began noticing something they were not trained to notice. After house fires, total losses, collapsed roofs, blackened interiors, one object was repeatedly found intact. A mass-produced print of a crying child. The walls burned. The painting didn't. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. The prints were popular, cheap, sold in thousands. Statistically, some would survive fires, but firefighters started keeping notes. Same image, same glass, same frame, scorched but unburned. In several cases, the painting had fallen face down during the fire and still showed no damage. The heat patterns disagreed. The reports accumulated. Local newspapers picked up the story in 1985 after a retired firefighter went public. Families who had lost their homes came forward independently. Each reported the same detail. The fire began elsewhere. Electrical faults, kitchen accidents, space heaters. The painting was not the cause. It was simply present, always untouched. As attention grew, so did institutional concern. Fire investigators quietly reviewed case files and found clustering far above baseline. Homes with the painting burned at higher than expected rates within months of purchase. Insurance companies flagged the image internally, though no formal exclusion was announced. The public response was denial mixed with ridicule. Then the recall began. Unofficially, thousands of prints were collected and burned in controlled bonfires organized by newspapers. Cameras rolled. The public was reassured. The problem was solved. But internal memos from one regional fire authority referenced a different action. Certain recovered prints were not destroyed. They were isolated for examination. Vault Rotation Protocol 11B was invoked. The language returned. Handlers reported unease almost immediately. Sleep disturbances. Heightened anxiety. One technician refused further contact after claiming the image felt warm, despite ambient conditions. No thermal anomaly was recorded. The reports were logged and closed. Access was restricted. No one explained why. No one joked anymore. The humane cost was not theoretical. Families lost homes, pets, photographs. One couple lost their child's room and every possession in it weeks after hanging the print. The mother later described waking up moments before the fire alarm, convinced something was wrong without knowing why. She never bought art again. Publicly, the crying boy phenomenon is remembered as mass hysteria, a moral panic, a tabloid story. Privately, several prints remain in controlled storage, unaccounted for in destruction tallies. The fires stopped when the paintings disappeared. Correlation was denied. Containment was not. By 1988, 11 intact prints were isolated under restricted fire investigation custody. The chair was never meant to survive. It was built in the 18th century by Thomas Busby, a convicted murderer awaiting execution in North Yorkshire. According to court records, Busby spent his final night drinking in a local inn, seated in a heavy oak chair near the fireplace. When guards came for him, he stood, turned back to the chair, and issued a final warning. Anyone who sat there would die. After his execution, the chair remained in the inn. Patrons treated the story as folklore. That confidence did not last. Within decades, deaths began to follow seating, not drinking. A chimney sweep collapsed after resting there. A coal miner died on his way home. A soldier on leave sat, laughed, and was killed in a car accident hours later. Different lives, same sequence. By the 20th century, the pattern had sharpened. Royal Air Force pilots stationed nearby visited the inn during the Second World War. Those who sat in the chair did not return from their next mission. The coincidence rate became impossible to ignore. Local authorities intervened quietly. The chair was removed and transferred to the Thirsk Museum under the justification of public safety. The object changed buildings. The incidents followed. Museum records describe controlled exposure tests conducted without public knowledge. Volunteers were never used. Instead, incidental contact was logged. A cleaner brushed against the chair and later suffered a fatal fall. A curator reported recurring chest pain after repeated proximity. He was reassigned within weeks. The chair was suspended from the ceiling to prevent accidental seating. No one touched the legs. No one argued with the decision. In the 1970s, officials considered destroying it. The proposal stalled after a transportation worker died en route during a preliminary relocation attempt. The death was ruled accidental. The chair was returned immediately. No further destruction efforts were documented. The file closed. The chair remained. The human loss accumulated quietly. One museum staff member lost her partner within days of a routine inventory that included the chair. Another refused to enter the gallery again, citing an overwhelming sense of pressure and dread. These accounts never appeared in exhibits or brochures. They appeared in transfer requests and sick leave forms. Today, the Devil's Chair hangs suspended, untouched, its legs never meeting the ground. Visitors are told it is dangerous as a matter of legend. The precautions tell a different story. Restricted access, limited proximity, no unsupervised entry. The chair is not destroyed. It is controlled. In 1974, the gallery housing the chair was permanently closed to unsupervised access. In 1936, a series of clay vessels were excavated near Baghdad, dated to roughly 250 BCE. Each contained a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of acidic residue. Publicly, they were labeled curiosities. Privately, laboratory notes used a different term: functional, repeatable. When assembled and filled with electrolytes, the vessels produced measurable electrical current, not symbolic, not theoretical. Real voltage, enough to plate metal, enough to stimulate nerve tissue. The official explanation suggested ritual use or coincidence, but internal testing went further, and then it stopped. One specific vessel was removed from the collection and reassigned for advanced analysis. Unlike the others, it produced unstable readings, voltage fluctuations without input, local electromagnetic interference. Instruments malfunctioned in proximity. Researchers documented headaches, vertigo, and a persistent metallic taste after short exposure sessions. The equipment failed first. The people followed. Suppression was immediate. The artifact was reclassified. Access logs tightened. A senior researcher suffered a sudden stroke days after a prolonged test cycle. He survived, but lost speech permanently. His notes were sealed. His name was removed from the project summary. The work continued without him, quietly. What made the Baghdad Battery different was not age or material. It was behavior. Unlike the other artifacts, it did not merely correlate with harm. It interacted, responded. When placed near other anomalous objects in shared storage, incident rates spiked. Electrical surges, fire alarms, personnel reassignment, containment procedures were revised. Cross-proximity was prohibited. This was the first time institutions acknowledged the possibility, internally, that these artifacts were not isolated problems. They were variables. When separated, incidents slowed. When grouped, they escalated. Vault Rotation Protocol 11B was expanded. Objects once scattered across museums were redistributed into controlled isolation. No announcement was made. No theory published. The humane cost was reduced, but not eliminated. A junior technician assigned to inventory reconciliation developed cardiac arrhythmia after repeated exposure. Another resigned without explanation, citing a sense of being watched by inanimate objects. These statements were not recorded as symptoms. They were classified as stress. The protocol adjusted anyway. Today, the Baghdad Battery relic is not on display. Its existence is acknowledged only in footnotes. It rests in climate-controlled storage under rules normally reserved for biohazards. The explanation offered is preservation. The behavior suggests containment. The object is not unique. It is the key. Because once institutions began treating these artifacts as interacting systems rather than isolated myths, the pattern finally made sense. Not curses, not superstition. Feedback. By the time Protocol 11B was fully enacted, the incidents stopped escalating. Only then.